Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. King Charles II of Spain. King Charles II of Spain was so horribly ugly that he terrified his own wife. He was the very last Habsburg to rule Spain, the last in a very long line of strictly pure blood relatives. He was born on November 16, 1661, and became king when he was only 4 years old. His mother ruled as regent until he became a teenager, at a time when the Habsburgs were trying to control the entire continent of Europe. The Habsburg family originated from Austria, and through breeding with one another incestuously, managed to spread their kin into all the most major European countries. They ruled in the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and Spain, but because they had been intermingling together for so long, they were stricken by all kinds of maladies. Charles II, perhaps the most inbred of them all, was so deformed and intellectually stunted that he couldn't rule properly. He couldn't figure out what was going on. Nobody wanted to look at him, and it was all the result of 16 generations of inbreeding. In fact, Charles II's grandmother and aunt were the same person. He was most likely sterile and impotent and never managed to produce an heir. The deformed king had a prominent jaw, a feature known as the Habsburg jaw, as well as 2 rows of unaligned teeth. He couldn't chew his own food and could barely speak due to his gigantic tongue. It was ironic because the whole purpose of inbreeding was to keep the family strong and pure, but instead, it only wound up making the men sterile, effectively bringing about their own end. Number 9. Elite Irish farmers. Just over 15 miles from Dublin, there is a circular structure from the Stone Age that rises out of the green hills over 30 feet high. The structure is made of over 200,000 tons of earth and stone and was erected by the very first farmers to arrive in Ireland. It's called Newgrange, and it was built almost 1,000 years before Stonehenge in England. It was one of the very first major monuments to be made by human hands, likely used as a ceremonial site and a communal tomb. It was the very first great construction project of an early egalitarian society. Within the Newgrange tomb, researchers looked at the DNA of a man buried in the year 3200 BC. He was found at the very center of the mound, suggesting he had been some kind of local royalty. To learn more about him, scientists studied his genes. They discovered that his parents had been so closely related that they were almost definitely brother and sister, or maybe even parent and child. According to archaeologist Jessica Smith from University College Dublin, this could be evidence of a genetically taboo social hierarchy. It's clear that an incestuous royal bloodline began in Ireland over 5,000 years ago. Long before the Habsburgs of Europe and the pharaohs of Egypt, elite Irish farmers were specifically breeding with their relatives to consolidate power and keep the wealth in the family. Number 8. The mermaid condition. The legend of the mermaid originated in ancient Assyria just shy of 3,000 years ago. The Assyrians worshipped the goddess Atargatis, who was a mermaid. Her worship later spread to Greece and Rome, and the legend of the mermaid became more romantic and fanciful. In Assyrian mythology, Atargatis was a goddess of fertility who would transform into a human-fish hybrid. There was another goddess in Assyrian mythology as well called Ascalon, who had the body of a fish. Historians believe the worship of both deities merged into one, and then the story changed and evolved from there. In regards to mutations, there is one theory that claims the origins of mermaids actually has something to do with a syndrome called Sirenomelia. It's a rare and usually fatal congenital malformation caused by the fusion of the lower limbs. A person is born with their legs fused together like a mermaid tail, and while nobody's really sure what causes the mutation, it probably has something to do with corrupted genetics. Some researchers believe that the product of an incestuous relationship could have a higher chance of being born with Sirenomelia. In other words, it's not totally out of the realm of possibility that somewhere in the history of Assyria, a royal baby was born with their legs fused together. Then, the baby spawned legends of mermaids around the world. Number 7. Queen Hatshepsut. In 2007, the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt, Zahi Hawass, announced the discovery of Queen Hatshepsut's mummy. The body was discovered in the Valley of the Kings and was the first royal mummy identification since Tutankhamun back in 1922. The ID was made by scanning a tooth in a box with Hatshepsut's name on it, then matching that tooth to a socket in the mummy's jaw. The identification was a miracle of science and a major win for archaeology. But when they looked closer at the mummy, they discovered something important. Queen Hatshepsut didn't quite have the appearance that one might expect from the most powerful woman in Egypt during the 15th century BC. She died around 50 years old with a lot of health issues. She was grossly overweight, almost definitely stricken by diabetes, arthritis, bad teeth, and may have even died from bone cancer. The queen's poor health probably had to do with the fact that she may have been born through a brother-sister relationship, which was extremely common in ancient Egypt. Her father was Thutmose I, who married a woman named Ahmose. Based on historical evidence, Ahmose was either the sister of the recently dead pharaoh Amenhotep I or Thutmose I's own sister. Historical documents don't exactly show whose sister she was, only that she was given the official title of King's Sister. Considering all of Hatshepsut's health issues, it seems very likely she was inbred. As for tradition, she would go on to marry her own brother, Thutmose II. Number 6. Princess Nahi-Ena-Ena. When the first foreigners arrived in Hawaii, one of the things they noticed the most was the practice of incest in the royal family. It was such an openly practiced tradition that there was no way they couldn't notice, and they wrote about it in their logbooks. While in many other countries it was considered a sin, here in Hawaii the practice was also strictly forbidden for ordinary people, but accepted and even encouraged for the royals. When Captain James Cook made contact with the Hawaiian people in 1778, he learned of the incestuous customs of the high society. You would think Europe would have been used to this by now. In the case of Hawaii, it wasn't merely that royalty would often breed with their own blood, but that the nearest possible relative was usually chosen for a high chief. In other words, if the chief didn't have a sister he could marry, the next closest relative would be chosen. However, it was always the child of a close brother and sister that received the most respect from the people. These children were considered of the highest caliber and closest to the gods. One of the most famous relationships was Nahi-Ena-Ena and her brother. She was a princess during the founding of the Kingdom of Hawaii in the 1800s. She was born in 1815 on the South Kona Island of Hawaii. Her mother was the queen consort, and she had 2 older brothers. She wound up falling in love with her brother Kamehameha III, and the local Hawaiian chiefs wanted them to marry. However, by this time, Protestant missionaries had taken a firm hold on the island and on the people. The church and many of the people opposed the union, calling it a sin. The European missionaries had such influence that they were able to block the marriage and have her instead marry William Pitt Lelehoku I in November of 1835. It was her brother's. King Kamehameha III claimed it was his son and would be the heir to the throne. Even though the missionaries had prevented their marriage, they apparently couldn't prevent the romantic love of the brother and sister. She was shunned and lived in isolation until the child was born, but it died just a few hours after birth. Number 5. King Vajiralongkorn. In 1972, King Vajiralongkorn was made the Crown Prince of Thailand, making him the official heir to the throne. His name translates to adorned with jewels or thunderbolts. He was a major playboy, even described by his mother, Queen Sirikit, in 1981 as being a bit of a Don Juan. He preferred to spend time with beautiful women instead of performing his princely duties. In 1977, he married his cousin, Princess Soamsawali. They had their first child in December of 1978, but then he ditched his blood-related wife and had 5 children with a young actress between 1979 and 1987. The list of scandals goes on, but King Vajiralongkorn's prowess was nothing compared to a much earlier ruler of Thailand. King Chulalongkorn was the 5th monarch of Siam, known simply as Rama V. He ruled from October 1868 to October of 1910, and during his reign, he married 4 of his half-sisters, along with others, and had a total of 77 children. While we don't know if any of them suffered specifically from inbreeding, historians believe there was a good chance, but the royal family would have kept that information quiet. Number 4. Queen Laodice IV. Queen Laodice IV was a Greek priestess, princess, and eventual queen of the Seleucid Empire. She was appointed as the chief priestess in 193 BC by her father Antiochus III. Her parents were first cousins. Her paternal grandfather and maternal grandmother were brother and sister. Her brother Antiochus was named crown prince in 196 BC, destined to succeed their father. In the same year, Laodice IV married him. She then bore a daughter, and shortly after, in the same year, her brother husband died. Single again, she remarried her second eldest brother, Seleucus IV Philopator. Their father, Antiochus III, died, and Seleucus ruled as king in his place from 187 BC until 175 BC, when he passed away. The couple had 3 children while they were together, but after he died, she moved on to her youngest brother, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. She had 2 children with him. Basically, she went from the oldest brother down to the youngest, having children with all of them, so they were all related in many ways. Number 3. Emperor Nero. Emperor Nero went down in history with a bad reputation. He was a deviant, violent man, and rumors go that he had a pretty disturbing relationship with his mother. To understand Nero's twisted mind, we have to go back to the year 65, when his wife Poppaea Sabina died. She supposedly passed away during childbirth, although it was rumored that Nero had kicked her to death on purpose. The next year, he married Statilia Messalina, and shortly after that, he married a man named Sporus, who supposedly looked a lot like his first wife that had died in childbirth. He had his newly married husband castrated and paraded him around in public dressed up like a woman. As evidence proves, Nero had a lot of different tastes and was a pretty colorful character. To make things even worse, he allegedly fell into a voracious romantic relationship with his mother. Some historians even believe Nero's insanity and broken moral compass was due to his own birth through inbreeding. When his father passed away when he was only 2 years old, he was adopted by Emperor Claudius when he and his mother Agrippina married. Claudius was Agrippina's paternal uncle, and it's believed that they were both products of an inbred bloodline going back generations. It could be that even though Nero wasn't physically affected, he suffered mentally as the byproduct of these family relationships. Number 2. The Saudi issue. Saudi Arabia has a major problem with inbreeding, not just with royalty, but with ordinary people. Particularly in the South, the New York Times has reported that the rate of marriage among blood relatives ranges between 55 to 70%. That means that 7 out of 10 people could be married to someone in their own family. Take the recent case of a 17-year-old Saudi girl named Salah al-Hefthi, who was betrothed by her parents to her first cousin. The new couple had 2 healthy boys together, but the 3rd child was born with spinal muscular atrophy. This disease is almost exclusive to children born through incestuous unions or from a stagnant bloodline. This is such a big problem in Saudi Arabia that researcher Dr. Schroeder called the country a living genetics laboratory. There is fear that the royal family might have a big problem, but are keeping it under wraps. The country is slowly coming to terms with the perils of inbreeding, but it is a cultural tradition that will most likely take many years to change. Number 1. The incestuous Maya. Just like the Europeans, the Egyptians, and the rulers in the Middle East, the people of Mesoamerica also practiced incest, particularly Maya royalty. One of the best examples of this brings us to a place called Palenque, a jungle ruin in southern Mexico. While today very little remains of Palenque other than crumbling pyramids and mysterious underground tombs, it was once a major hub for astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. When Europe was floundering in the Dark Ages, the Maya were advancing by leaps and bounds. Ruling over the people of Palenque in the 7th century was King Pakal, aka Pakal the Great. He ruled from between 615 and 683 AD, a total of 68 years. That makes him the 6th longest verified ruling sovereign monarch in history, and it was over 1,300 years ago. When King Pakal's body was discovered in a sarcophagus deep in an amazing tomb in Palenque, it was a pretty major discovery. It was the Maya equivalent of discovering Tutankhamun in Egypt. His sarcophagus was elaborately carved. It weighed 22 tons, and his tomb was filled with precious artifacts. However, what we're here to talk about is his foot. King Pakal had a club foot, which experts believe was the result of generations and generations of incest. The Maya did this to protect their bloodline, just like everywhere else in the world, and it caused genetic problems. Even though King Pakal dominated the Mexican jungle for nearly 7 decades, he hobbled around with a club foot because his parents had almost certainly been close blood relatives. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time for more amazing history. Bye!